It appears President Trump was up late last night watching election results. In a flurry of rambling social media posts, he weighed in on why Republicans lost across the board. Just after 10 p.m. Eastern, Trump offered this excuse for the sweeping nationwide GOP losses, writing, quote, "Trump wasn't on the ballot and shutdown were the two reasons that Republicans lost elections tonight." About an hour later, he posted again, calling for the passage of so-called voter reform, pushing for voter ID laws, ending mail-in voting, and eliminating the filibuster. During New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani's victory speech, Trump also posted in all caps, "And so it begins." Meanwhile, the official White House Instagram account posted a modified version of the Knicks logo that read, "Trump is your president," presumably a reaction to Mamdani's win. And we saw Mamdani was pretty defiant when talking about Trump last night. But today in Washington, a big case about Trump and one of his signature policies, because the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in the case of Trump's use of emergency powers to enact sweeping tariffs on U.S. trade partners. The case is going to have major implications on America's economic policy and also test the bounds of executive authority. While the Republican majority court has often ruled in favor of the president, legal experts say this could be a toss-up. The Constitution gives Congress the power to impose taxes. But soon after taking office, Trump declared that a 1977 law gave him the power to impose tariffs unilaterally during emergencies. The statute gives the president certain tools to deal with any unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States. That includes the power to regulate imports. The president's lawyers say that language gives him broad authority to impose tariffs when he believes an emergency exists. And therein is the crux of the Supreme Court's problem. MSNBC legal affairs reporter Fallon Gallagher joins me here on set. She has, of course, been following this case. You're going to go to the Supreme Court a little later this morning. Can you explain what we expect to hear today, what we're watching for as this begins?
Yeah, Allie. So just like you touched on it, the president's argument here is that this is a national emergency. And because it's a national emergency, he, as the president of the United States, has the authority to impose these tariffs as he chooses. Now, a lot of the critics here are saying a trade deficit does not constitute a national emergency.
Yeah, I was going to say, is getting ripped off a national emergency?
No, and quite frankly, on the converse side of that, the small businesses who have sued in this case are saying that these tariffs are a national emergency for their businesses, for their companies, for the consumers, for the American consumer who this tax will ultimately pass on to. So those people are saying that not only is this an emergency for them, and that's why they've sued, but that this is a separation of powers issue, that Congress is the one who has the authority to implement these tariffs, not the president unilaterally, and that, quite frankly, to them, this is like taxation without representation, which you'll remember we fought a whole entire war about.
Yeah, I think I read something about that.
Yeah. So, these people are really, really upset, and they think that they have a strong case here, and they thought, why not me? So that's why they're suing here.
So that's why they're the plaintiffs in this case. And we've even seen some members of Congress in the Senate, they're largely messaging votes because they're not going anywhere. But when it comes to specific tariffs and other trade policies that the president has done, you've even seen in bipartisan fashion some rebukes, some uncomfortability with the way that this White House has done them unilaterally without bringing in Congress. So I think the open question here for a court that gave the president broad immunity, is this a moment for them to finally say there is a limit to how much we will allow this president to do?
Well, and that's what's really interesting here. This is the same court that last year granted President Trump, this same sitting president, immunity to do as he chooses. Now, what's really interesting here is that this case came through that emergency docket, which we've been talking about, that shadow docket a lot, where things are fast-tracked and then maybe sent back down to the lower court. Now, this is the second time that justices have said, you know what, we're not just going to rule on this with an unsigned brief order. We actually want to hear arguments on that. And so that's kind of, if I'm paying attention closely, that's what makes me think that this could be different, and perhaps this is the time where they could say, no, maybe that's too far. I mean, you have to remember, this is the John Roberts court, and this is a court that's skeptical of too much government overreach. But then at the same time, you have justices like Brett Kavanaugh, who have been supporters of broad presidential authority. So I think it'll be really interesting to see who questions what today, and I'll be inside the court looking. I'll be paying very close attention to Justice Barrett, who sometimes has a tendency to swing from the rest of the so-called conservative justices. But really, we won't know probably in the immediate future how they're going to go. This is something that we might not actually know the answer to until June.
Well, I was going to say, because the timeline on this is so important, given the fact that Trump is actively negotiating what he's calling trade deals, what are actually more like handshake trade agreements. But the fact that other countries are going to have to abide by whatever these levels are that he's been setting, whether it's 10% or 15%, 57%. I mean, there's so many numbers across the board, depending on which country you're talking about. There's real implications, not just for those countries and their relations relations with the U.S., but for the consumer who's like, okay, where's my stuff coming from and how much am I paying for it? So when might we actually see a decision?
Yeah, well, I mean, so now that this is on the merits docket, it's not going to be one of those cases where we get an immediate decision that just might pop up in my email, brief unsigned order. This is something that we will likely get on a decision day. And as we've seen, this is a blockbuster case this term, which I want to make that abundantly clear. This is probably the biggest case on their docket right now. Historically, they've waited until the end of the term, that late June, early July, to release those big headline decisions. So it could be then, it could be earlier. I mean, they fast-tracked this to get it on the schedule. This is one of the earliest dates. You'll remember that the Supreme Court started its term in October. It's November 5th today. So they are moving kind of quickly. We just don't know, though. I mean, it's probably going to be, I would say, January at the very earliest.
At the very earliest. It leaves a major economic piece of the president's agenda just sort of hanging in the balance. I know you're going to be all over it. Very interested to see what we hear at court today. Fallon Gallagher, MSNBC legal affairs reporter. Thank you for coming on, sharing it with us.
Thank you.